TechMet's a private company that invests in and builds projects that either produce or process or recycles the critical minerals that go into, more broadly, the energy transition, but more specifically batteries for electric vehicles and other renewable energy systems. So our strategy and what has driven the creation of TechMet, which I founded in 2017, is really a recognition of the fact that while it is commonly understood that we're at an inflection point with respect to a radical transformation from fossil fuels to renewable energy systems and a transformation of mobility and energy more broadly to mitigate climate change, what's not adequately recognized yet, though the world's catching up, is the fact that you can't build EVs and wind turbines and solar cells and grid-scale batteries without a relatively small set of critical minerals that are in structural short supply relative to this exponential growth in demand, and whose global supply chain is almost entirely controlled by China, who's for the last 15 years had a free rein to build capacity to process and to secure control of a primary resource everywhere in the world, Africa, South America, Australia, and elsewhere. So, we're at the beginning of really an epic supply-demand dislocation for these minerals that we produce, process, and recycle. So these metals are going to have to go up much further in price and stay up much longer than we would like, or that people generally recognize. And therefore, the value creation opportunities in this space are enormous. They are also, our industry needs to radically transform, not only in terms of volumes, because we need multiples of the present global supply of nickel and lithium and cobalt and rare earth metals to feed the energy transition over the next 2, 3, 5, 10, and 20 years. But we have to do it without being beholden to interests that are in competition with US values and world position, which we are dedicated to uphold. And we have to do it with high ESG standards and low carbon footprint in order to be responsible contributors to a clean, sustainable world, or at least the technologies to facilitate a clean, sustainable world. So on all those fronts, TechMet seeks to be, at the forefront of capitalizing these industry transformations. So we have 10 operating companies around Africa, Europe, North America, South America, where we're the primary funder and where we're either expanding existing production or building late-stage development projects through to production. Everything we're doing is to responsibly produce and deliver the ingredients for technologies that need to scale radically in order for us to mitigate climate change. So if we're going to have a successful transition, as one example, from internal combustion engines vehicles to electric vehicles, and the penetration of EVs is going to grow from 20% to 30% to 50% to 80% over the coming decade, that requires many, many, many multiples of present global supply of all of the metals that go into batteries and electric motors. Like many multiples. If, for instance, Tesla, as an example, were to meet their target of producing 20 million electric vehicles a year by 2030, that alone would require more than 2 times the present global annual supply of lithium. And that's before GM and Ford and VW and the Chinese, who will continue to produce 2/3 of all the batteries and electric vehicles in the world and are growing quicker than us, and therefore absorbing more and more of the available supply of critical minerals that they control the supply chain of. So, we do see ourselves as a key front in the war against climate change, because you can't have climate change mitigation without critical minerals going into these technologies. And we see ourselves as a key front in, perhaps war is a word that one doesn't want to use because it's emotive, but the competition to balance China's aspirations to be the preeminent global technological, industrial, and commercial power over the coming decades, which is an aspiration that is, in my view, directly threatening to our values and way of life, and freedom and democracy. We have to educate the world. I mean, I would love to get to a point, and maybe it sounds facetious, but I'd love students on campuses to be protesting, to demand that their university endowments invest in metals and mining to feed the energy transition. Mining is still tainted by a perception of a history of being high environmental impact and irresponsible from a political and social interface point of view, which in some respects has been the case historically. But it doesn't need to be the case. Mining can be clean and sustainable and low environmental impact and low carbon footprint and very responsible in terms of social and political engagement. And that's what we as TechMet do everywhere in Africa, South America, as well as here in the US and in Europe. And that's what the industry has to do. And that's what funders and government agency has to support us doing. And government's starting to act. What's happening in Washington with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, in terms of the elements of that legislation that relates to critical minerals supply chain security for the US and for the energy transition, are radical and transformative and massively catalytic in Europe and Japan and elsewhere with respect to what governments need to do to make up for what has been and will continue to be a massive market failure. We can't rely on the market. We need government regulation, government de-risking, government funding, and we're starting to get it. We need a lot more of it, and we need not only the commitment, but the delivery of enhanced functionality to actually get money out of the door and engage in projects and engage in supply chains rather than just talk about it and pass legislation. So there's still a lot of work to do.